Welcome back to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, your host for tonight. Tell me, where are you listening from? The lamps are dim in Elmridge-on-Hollow, a quiet village where the bell tower hasn't rung in years. Until last night. They say one toll echoed through the mist, then silence. So, pour your tea, and listen closely. Because somewhere behind those walls, a secret tolls again. The afternoon sky hung low over Elmridge-on-Hollow, calm and silver. Miss Marple sat in Lady Bantry's parlour, a cup of tea warming her hands. Steam curled like a thought left unfinished. They spoke softly gardens, roses, weather, small sins of the vicar's wife. Lady Bantry laughed once, thin and brittle. "The lavender's growing wild this year," she said. Miss Marple smiled. It always does when no one tends to it. The clock ticked faintly. Rain touched the window pane. The scent of damp earth slipped in from the garden. Then Lady Bantry's tone changed just slightly. "You heard it, didn't you, Jane?" Miss Marple looked up. "Heard what, dear?" "The bell," Lady Bantry whispered. "Last night, near midnight. One toll, then nothing." Miss Marple set her cup down slowly. "The bell tower?" "Yes, but there was no service. No one inside the church." The silence stretched. Even the clock seemed to pause. Outside, a blackbird called once, sharply, then stopped. Miss Marple's mind ticked faster than the clock ever could. Elmridge's bell hadn't rung in years. The rope was frayed, the mechanism stiff with rust. No one could ring it by mistake. "Perhaps the wind," she said gently. Lady Bantry shook her head. "No wind last night. Not a leaf moved." A small smile touched Miss Marple's lips, the kind that meant her thoughts had wandered somewhere dark. She reached for another biscuit, though her eyes never left the window. "Strange things do happen in spring," she murmured. Lady Bantry frowned. "You don't believe in ghosts, do you?" Miss Marple stirred her tea. "Only the living kind." For a long moment, neither spoke. The room held its breath. Rain softened against the glass. Lady Bantry rose to fetch more tea. When she turned back, Miss Marple was still, listening not to the rain, but to something quieter. A memory, perhaps, or a warning. Because somewhere beyond that garden, the old church bell waited, and beneath its tower, a rope swayed in the dark. Miss Marple's voice was low when she finally spoke. "And yet," she said, her eyes narrowing, "someone pulled that rope." Morning light spilled through the stained glass of St. Michael's Church, soft and cold. Mist still clung to the graves. A few villagers lingered near the gate, whispering about the bell that had rung in the night. Then a scream cut through the quiet. "Something's up there." Heads turned toward the tower. The heavy rope swayed on its own, creaking against the pulley. No wind, no hands visible. A young constable ran forward. "Everyone stay back." He grabbed the rope. It jerked once, hard, then stopped still, like it was holding its breath. Miss Marple, who had come early for morning service, stood near the pews. Her face remained calm, but her eyes sharp. Alert followed every movement. "Careful," she said softly. "That's no ordinary swing." Two officers entered the tower stairway. Their boots echoed up the stone steps. A moment later came a shout. Then the rope gave way and dropped heavily. Something came with it. The crowd gasped as the weight thudded onto the flagstone floor. A man's body, tangled in the cord. Grey coat, twisted collar, limp hands. The church fell silent. Even the sparrows stopped. Inspector Slack pushed through the doorway. "Good Lord," he muttered. He knelt beside the figure. The face was pale, drained of colour, mouth half open as if mid-prayer. Miss Marple moved closer, quietly, respectfully. "That's Mr. Abel Trask," someone whispered. "The verger." Slack nodded grimly. "Known to you, Miss Marple?" "Only by reputation," she said. "Punctual, precise, never careless." A candle rolled from the altar rail, its flame flickering out. The smell of smoke hung low. Miss Marple looked at the rope frayed, twisted, yet tied in a deliberate knot. Her gaze shifted to the bell above. The clapper stained dark. Slack rose. "Accident, perhaps." He slipped. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. Perhaps, though accidents rarely tie themselves so neatly. The constable swallowed hard. "Should I fetch the doctor, sir?" "Yes," Slack said. "And keep the villagers outside." Miss Marple stayed where she was, hands folded, eyes tracing the rope's cruel path from ceiling to floor. She noticed the bruising, the angle of the knot, the mark beneath the jaw, details the others avoided. Then she spoke, almost to herself, her tone flat and certain. "The rope," she said softly, was tied around his neck. Inspector Slack arrived just after dawn. His coat was still wet from the rain, his hat pulled low, his expression sharp. The villagers parted as he stepped through the church gate. Whispers rose and fell like wind through grass. "Poor Mr. Trask. God rest him. Did you hear the bell? I swear it tolled by itself." Slack didn't answer anyone. He glanced once toward the tower, and then at Miss Marple, who stood quietly near the pews. "You? Again?" he said softly. She smiled. "You say that as though I planned it." The vicar hurried forward, pale and trembling. "I've sent for the coroner. It's dreadful, Inspector. I can't imagine how—" "Calm yourself, Reverend," Slack interrupted. "Tell me what you know." The vicar wrung his hands. "Nothing, truly. I went home after evening prayer. I heard nothing until this morning." Miss Marple studied him as he spoke. His voice wavered, but his eyes stayed dry. Fear, yes, but not grief. Her gaze drifted to the choir seats. 5 chairs, 1 overturned. A hymn book on the floor, open, edges wet with candle wax. Grace Huxley entered then tall, composed, the headmistress of Elmridge School. Her coat was pressed, but her shoes were muddy. "Terrible business," she said, keeping her distance. "The children are frightened." Slack nodded. "You were at the church last night, I'm told." "Briefly," she replied. "Choir practice ended by 9. We locked up and left." Miss Marple's voice was light. "Did you hear the bell, Miss Huxley?" Grace hesitated just enough for a shadow to pass across her face. "No," she said. "I was already home." Her eyes slid away toward the door. Miss Marple noted it, that small evasion, that flicker of relief when the question stopped. Some people tremble at truth. Others look too calm. Slack began speaking with the constables, directing them to check the tower again. The villagers lingered outside, afraid to go home, drawn by the strangeness of it all. Inside, the church felt colder. Candles burned low. The bell rope hung still, dark and heavy with dust. Miss Marple bent to pick up the fallen hymn book. Its cover was torn, pages damp. Something caught her eye, a small piece missing from the corner, and on the torn edge, a faint streak of red. She held it carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Blood," she said. Her expression did not change, but her tone hardened. Someone was close enough to pray and kill. She closed the book slowly. The air inside Street Michael's seemed to tighten around her words. Outside, the bell gave one soft creak in the wind. Then silence. The vicar sat behind his desk, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the cross above the window. Light filtered through the glass, pale and uncertain. Miss Marple stood near the corner, quiet, watching the dust move in the air. Inspector Slack leaned against the wall. "Let's start simple," he said. "You were here last night?" The vicar nodded slowly. "Only for evening prayers. I left before 9. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "Were you alone?" A pause. Then, "Yes, I always am after service." She tilted her head slightly. "That must be lonely." He smiled faintly. "God keeps company better than men, Miss Marple." Slack opened his notebook. "The bell rang close to midnight," he said. "Any idea who might have been in the church?" "None," the vicar said quickly. "The doors were locked. They always are." Miss Marple's eyes dropped to his sleeve. A faint smear of wax glistened near the cuff. She stepped closer. "You lit candles after service?" His eyes flicked toward her, then away. I tidied the altar. Perhaps the wax came from that." "Perhaps," she murmured. Her tone was soft, but her gaze stayed sharp. Slack scribbled. "You didn't hear the bell yourself?" No. I was in bed by then. Anyone with you? The vicar hesitated. No, only the Lord. The room held silence for a moment. Outside, the churchyard crow cawed once, harsh and lonely. Miss Marple folded her hands. You've been here many years, Reverend. He nodded. 22 this spring. And in all that time, she said slowly, has the bell ever rung itself? He swallowed. No. Her tone stayed calm. Then last night, something changed. He looked down at his clasped hands. Everything changes, Miss Marple. Even the faithful lose faith. Slack frowned. You mean Mr. Trask? The vicar's jaw tightened. Abel was difficult. He kept accounts too strictly. Some in the parish felt he ruled, not served. Miss Marple listened without comment. When he finished, she asked one question. Did you hear the tower door close? His eyes lifted. Yes, but it was locked. He blinked, realizing what he'd just admitted. Slack straightened. Locked? From the outside? The vicar didn't answer. Miss Marple stepped to the shelf near the door, where the church keys hung neatly on hooks. Each tag bore a name: vestry, gate, tower. She lifted the one marked tower and held it to the light. No dust, no rust. Polished clean, as if recently handled. She turned it slowly between her fingers. The vicar watched, colour draining from his face. Miss Marple set it down carefully. Her voice was quiet, certain. Strange thing, she said. How faith keeps things spotless, even keys no one uses. The room went still. The candle flame on the desk trembled once, and somewhere above them, the bell gave a single hollow echo. The choir room smelled faintly of polish and paper. Chairs stood in neat rows, hymn sheets stacked, music left mid-turn. A young girl sat near the piano, twisting her fingers together. Miss Marple entered quietly. Lily, isn't it? The girl nodded. Her voice trembled. They said I shouldn't talk. Inspector Slack stood by the doorway, arms folded. Tell her what you told the others, he said. Lily looked down at her hands. I saw Mr. Trask last night, she whispered. Her words came fast, like something she'd held too long. He was arguing with a woman. Slack straightened. Who? I don't know. It was dark, but she wore grey. Miss Marple's tone was soft. You're certain it was a woman? Yes, ma'am. Her voice was sharp. He said something about a debt. Then she slapped him. The inspector's pen froze mid-note. And you're sure of this? Lily nodded again, eyes wide. No one believed me. They said I imagined it. That I was frightened. Miss Marple stepped closer, lowering her voice. You are frightened, aren't you? Lily hesitated. Yes, but not of him. The words hung there, thin as glass. Miss Marple noticed the bruises on the girl's wrist. Small, round, recent. She reached out gently. May I? Lily flinched, then nodded. Finger-shaped marks, faint but visible. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Who were you protecting, my dear? Lily's lips parted. Her gaze shifted toward the window, toward the school across the green. Not him, she whispered. Her. Slack frowned. Her who? Lily didn't answer. She pressed her hands to her face, shaking her head. I shouldn't have said anything. She'll know. Miss Marple crouched beside her chair. Who will know? The girl's breathing quickened. Her voice was barely a breath. She said, if I told anyone, the school would close. Everyone would suffer. Slack exchanged a look with Miss Marple. Headmistress? He mouthed. Miss Marple gave no reply. She only turned her gaze to the window again. Outside, the school bell glinted in the pale Sunday, the same dull metal as the one that hung above the dead man. Lily followed her eyes. Her hand trembled as she lifted it slow, hesitant. Then she pointed through the glass, toward the house at the edge of the green, Grace Huxley's house. Miss Marple rose, calm but certain, her voice quiet as a prayer. She points, she said softly, toward the headmistress's house. Grace Huxley's office smelled of chalk and polish. Books lined the shelves in perfect order. A photograph of the school choir hung above the desk, neat rows of smiling children, Mr. Trask standing at the back. Miss Marple sat opposite her, calm as ever, hands folded on her lap. Inspector Slack stood near the window, watching the drizzle slide down the glass. Grace's voice was brisk, precise. "I was home all night, Miss Marple. I don't know what more I can say." Miss Marple nodded politely. "I quite understand. It's only that the church bell rang so very late. Some say after midnight." Grace's eyes flicked. Upward, then away. "I heard nothing. I was asleep by 11. Slack spoke up. "You live near the green, ma'am. That tower's not 50 yards from your garden. Hard to miss a toll like that." Grace's fingers tightened on her pen. "Perhaps I'm a heavier sleeper than most." Miss Marple's gaze wandered not to Grace's face, but to the carpet. A faint trail of dry mud led from the door to the desk. She followed it with her eyes until they rested on a pair of neatly placed shoes by the hearth. "Lovely shoes," she said gently. "New?" Grace blinked. "Hardly. I've had them for months." Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. "They look freshly cleaned." The headmistress stiffened. "It rained last night," she said quickly. "The path was muddy when I came home from supper with the bursar." Slack's tone was casual. "What time was that?" 9:30. "And after that?" "Home, alone, reading by the fire." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the fireplace. Cold, no ashes, not a trace of smoke. She smiled faintly. "What were you reading?" Grace hesitated. "A collection of sermons, hardly thrilling." Miss Marple nodded. "And you went to bed soon after?" "Yes, 10 at the latest." A pause, long enough for truth to sweat under silence. Then Miss Marple said softly, "You keep your house very tidy, Miss Huxley. Not a speck out of place." "I run a school, Miss Marple. I believe in discipline." Her voice was clipped now, her patience frayed. "And I don't like your questions." Miss Marple didn't flinch. Her tone stayed light. Nor did Mr. Trask. The words landed like a dropped stone. Grace froze. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the ticking clock on her desk. Miss Marple stood. "Thank you for your time," she said kindly. "I'm sure we'll speak again." As she walked out, Slack caught her eye. "Well?" he whispered. Miss Marple smiled, that knowing, quiet smile. "She's lying," she said softly, "but not well." Outside, the rain began again, and behind the window glass, Grace Huxley's hand trembled as she reached to close the curtains. The tower loomed above the churchyard, black against the pale sky. A constable stood at the base, rope coiled in his hands, boots dark with mud. Inspector Slack climbed the narrow stair, lantern in hand, Miss Marple just behind. "Keep close," he warned. "These steps are older than both of us." She smiled faintly. "Then they'll understand our pace." The air grew colder as they reached the top. Dust drifted in lazy spirals. The bell hung motionless, its bronze edge dull with soot. Beneath it, the wooden floor was scattered with old wax, torn cloth, and a broken chain. Slack crouched by the wall. "Look here," he said. He held up a small brass key. Not old, bright, sharp, edged, almost new. Miss Marple took it delicately between her fingers. "This wasn't forged long ago," she murmured. The inspector frowned. "Belongs to the church, doesn't it?" She shook her head. "No. The cut is wrong. The teeth are too deep." He turned it over in the light. "You mean it's a copy?" "Yes," she said softly. "A recent one." Slack's brow furrowed. "We keep all tower keys in the vestry box." "Then someone," she said, "made sure they had another." The bell creaked faintly above them. Slack stood, brushing the dust from his knees. "Who'd want a second key to a place no one uses?" Miss Marple smiled, the kind of smile that meant she already had ideas she wouldn't yet share. "Whoever copied this," she said slowly, "planned ahead." He looked at her. "You think this was deliberate?" "I think," she said, "that murder rarely improvises." They started down the narrow stair again. Each step echoed, hollow and close. Halfway down, Miss Marple stopped. Her eyes had caught something dark, caught between two boards. She bent, easing it free with her handkerchief. Slack leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" She opened her palm. A single feather, black, glossy, tipped with dust, too large for a sparrow, too new for decay. Slack frowned. "Bird got trapped up here, maybe." Miss Marple didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on it, thoughtful, cold. She folded the feather into her handkerchief and tucked it away. Then, quietly, she said, "No bird trapped itself in a locked tower." They reached the bottom step. The church door stood open to the wind. Behind them, the bell gave one long moan as if it remembered what it had seen. Miss Marple looked back once, her eyes on the tower's shadow. "Someone," she murmured, "left a mark of their own wings behind. A black feather found on the tower floor." Mr. Doyle lived in the small cottage just beyond the graveyard wall. Smoke curled from the chimney, heavy and dark. The faint sound of wings beat against the grey morning air. Miss Marple approached slowly. A raven croaked from the fence post, watching her with glassy eyes. She smiled politely. "You keep unusual company, Mr. Doyle." He looked up from his chair, weathered face, dark coat, rough hands. "They mind their own business, mostly," he said. His voice was hoarse, like gravel turned over in a bucket. Inspector Slack stood a few paces back, notebook ready. "You're the bell ringer's brother?" "Aye," Doyle said. "Abel was family. Not close, but blood's blood." Miss Marple's tone was soft. "You were near the church last night?" He shook his head. "At home, feeding the birds. Didn't hear a thing till morning." She nodded, eyes drifting to his sleeve. Soot. Fine black streaks near the cuff. She tilted her head. "You keep a good fire, Mr. Doyle?" "Chimney's old," he replied. "Smoke clings to everything." Slack stepped forward. "Mind telling us where you were between 10 and midnight?" "Here," Doyle said. "Like I told you." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Alone?" He paused. "Mostly." The raven stirred, restless. One hopped closer, wings flaring once before folding again. "They don't like strangers," Doyle muttered. Miss Marple turned her gaze to the birds. "Beautiful creatures," she said. "Intelligent. Loyal." He looked up. "They sense things, you know. Death. Storms. Lies." "Do they now?" she said lightly. He nodded, serious. "That bell. It's cursed. It tolls when sin returns. When someone in the village does wrong." Slack gave a small snort. "You believe that?" "I've lived here long enough to know better than not to." Miss Marple studied him quietly. His eyes didn't meet hers. When they did, they flickered not fear, but guilt's shadow. "You speak of sin, Mr. Doyle," she said softly. "But guilt, I've found, rings louder than any bell." He said nothing, only turned to the stove, tossing in a few pieces of paper. They caught quickly, flame licking at the edges. Slack leaned in. "What's that you're burning?" "Old ledgers. My brother's work. No use to anyone now." Miss Marple stepped closer to the stove. Something crisped in the flames. Thick parchment, inked handwriting. The scent of wax and smoke filled the air. She met Doyle's eyes. "Some things burn," she said quietly, "but they don't disappear." He gave a small, hard smile. "Maybe that's what worries me." The fire hissed. A raven cawed outside, sharp, echoing. Miss Marple turned to leave, wrapping her shawl tighter. Behind her, Doyle fed another page into the fire. The flames leapt, brighter, hungrier. Slack whispered, "He's hiding something." Miss Marple nodded once. "Yes," she murmured, "and he's watching it burn." Doyle burned something in his stove as she leaves. The church was empty again by afternoon. Rain drummed softly on the roof. Miss Marple sat alone in the front pew, the hymn book open across her knees. The page was wrinkled, corner torn, faintly stained with blood. She traced the margin with one finger. The note there was written in a tight, deliberate hand. "Debt forgiven one remains." She read it twice, then again, slower. The words weren't a verse from Abide With Me. They were a message, a private one. Inspector Slack entered quietly, hat in hand. "You're still at it, Miss Marple. You'll wear the ink off that page." She smiled faintly. Perhaps. But ink, like guilt, leaves traces even when you scrub. He frowned. You think it means something? Oh, everything means something, Inspector. The trick is knowing which part means what. He looked down at the page. Debt forgiven, one remains. Sounds like a sermon. Miss Marple shook her head. No sermon. A warning. She turned the book so the light caught the writing better. The vicar, she murmured. He owed Mr. Trask once. Slack blinked. Money? No, she said softly. A moral debt. The kind no one wants to admit. She closed the hymn book carefully. Years ago, Mr. Trask covered something for him. Something that could have ended his parish. That kind of favor. It doesn't go away easily. Slack rubbed his chin. So you're saying Trask had leverage? I'm saying, Miss Marple replied, that when a man feels owned, he begins to pray for release. And sometimes, she added, he finds it only when the one who owns him is gone. She looked toward the pulpit. The altar candle still smoked faintly. On the step below it, a few sheets of paper lay scattered. She gathered them gently torn confessional slips, folded in half, unsigned. Confession night. Each week the vicar burned them after prayer, except these. One was half missing, torn clean from the corner. The edge matched the missing piece from the hymn book. Slack leaned over her shoulder. What does it say? She read aloud quietly. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I took what was not mine, but he knew. He always knew. Her voice dropped. Someone came here last night to confess, Inspector. Slack's eyes widened. Before the murder? Perhaps during, she said. She held the torn edge beside the hymn book page. They fit perfectly, same tear, same angle. She closed the book and exhaled. Whoever wrote this, she said softly, tried to make peace before the act. And then? Slack asked. She looked at the altar, the ashes, the missing page, the faint trail of soot. Then they tore their confession out, she whispered, and hid it. Someone's confession was torn out and hidden. Dusk settled over Elmridge on Hollow like a breath held too long. The streets were quiet. Shutters closed early. Only the church windows still glowed faintly against the dying light. Miss Marple moved slowly up the gravel path. Her shawl fluttered in the chill wind. The tower loomed above, dark, heavy, silent now, but something in its silence felt wrong, too complete. She reached the great oak door and pressed it open. The hinges moaned like an old wound. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Her footsteps echoed softly across the stone. The nave stretched ahead long shadows, long secrets. A single candle burned near the altar, its flame low, trembling. She frowned. No service had been held since morning, and yet the wick was fresh. She moved closer. Each step slow, measured, her shoes whispering on the floor. The wind groaned through the tower above, making the rafters creak like bones. For a moment, she thought she heard a sigh or perhaps a prayer drifting through the cold air. She stopped beside the altar rail. The candle flame leaned toward her, thin and gold. Next to it lay an alaf, open hymnal, pages fluttering. She recognized it. The same book, the same missing page. Her fingers brushed the edge of the pew. Warm. Someone had been here recently. Behind her, something shifted. A faint scuff, then another. Footsteps. She turned slowly, eyes searching the dark. Who's there? She asked, her tone steady. No reply. Only the sound of the wind crawling down from the tower stairs. She took one step back toward the aisle. The candle flickered once, guttering. Her shadow stretched long across the floor, thin and wavering. A voice broke the silence low near her ear. You shouldn't be here, Miss Marple. She froze. The voice was male, soft, but strained, familiar. Is that you, Reverend? She said calmly. No answer, only breathing. The air shifted again. Something brushed past her shoulder, cold, swift, unseen. The flame danced wildly. Then a hand, she felt it, quick, deliberate, swept across the altar. The candle snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the church. Only the echo of her own heartbeat filled the void. Miss Marple stood perfectly still, listening. No footsteps now, no breathing. Only the faint rattle of the tower rope swaying far above. She reached out, fingers finding the edge of the pew, steadying herself. Her voice came quiet, certain. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "you've already made one mistake." Outside, the bell groaned once in the wind, just once. Then silence. Morning light slanted through Grace Huxley's sitting room. The curtains were half drawn, the air still thick with perfume and silence. Miss Marple sat across from her, hands folded neatly, eyes kind but sharp. Grace looked tired. Her poise was slipping. There were dark shadows beneath her eyes, not from grief, but from fear. "You came early," she said quietly. Miss Marple smiled. "Truth rarely keeps good hours." Grace's lips tightened. "I have nothing to hide." Miss Marple nodded, slowly. "Then you won't mind if I ask what Mr. Trask held over you?" The color drained from Grace's face. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sank into the nearest chair. "How did you?" Miss Marple's voice was soft. "I've lived long enough to know the sound of a conscience pressed too hard." Grace looked at the floor. Her fingers twisted a handkerchief until it frayed. "He found the letters," she whispered. "Letters? Yes, from my husband, before he died." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "He wasn't the man everyone thought he was, Miss Marple. There was money missing from the school funds. I burned what I could, but Trask found what remained." Miss Marple said nothing. Grace went on, her voice trembling. "He came to me 2 years ago, said he'd keep it quiet for a price. I paid him every month." Inspector Slack, standing by the mantel, frowned. "Blackmail." Grace nodded, eyes distant. "He said if I stopped paying, he'd show the letters to the vicar, to the bishop, everyone." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "And last night?" Grace took a breath. "I told him no more. I'm done being frightened." He laughed, said I'd regret it before dawn. Her voice broke. "I left. I swear I left." Miss Marple's eyes stayed gentle, but her words carried weight. "Where did you go, Grace?" She hesitated. "Home. Straight home. You didn't go near the church again?" "No." Her answer came too quickly. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to the small table beside them. A coin purse lay open, its contents scattered. Inside, a folded note. 2 words, scrawled in Trask's rough hand. "Midnight. Tower." Grace saw where she was looking and closed the purse with shaking fingers. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't kill him, Jane." Miss Marple didn't reply. Grace's hands trembled now, white against the fabric. "There was someone else?" "There," she said suddenly. Her eyes met Miss Marple's, desperate, pleading. "Someone else was in that tower." Miss Marple looked toward the window. The sky outside was pale, thin with rain. Her voice came quiet, deliberate. "Then it's time," she said. "We find out who followed you there." "But I didn't kill him, Jane. Someone else was there." The schoolroom was empty. Late afternoon light slanted across the desks, catching the dust in slow, golden trails. Lily stood near the window, twisting a scrap of ribbon between her fingers. Miss Marple closed the door softly behind her. "Don't be frightened, my dear," she said. Lily didn't turn. "I'm not frightened. Just tired." Inspector Slack leaned against the doorframe. His notebook was open, but his tone stayed kind. "You said you had something to tell us, Lily. Best to get it done." The girl took a breath. "I did something wrong." Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the quiet. "I stole the tower key." Slack blinked. "From Mr. Trask?" She nodded. "He used to go there at night. Said he was checking the ropes, but he wasn't. I saw him with envelopes. Money sometimes. So I took the key. I thought it would stop him." Miss Marple moved closer, calm as ever. "You kept it all this time?" "Yes, ma'am. But last week it went missing. I think he found out. He was angry." Her hands tightened around the ribbon until it tore. Tears filled her eyes. "He said I'd ruined everything." He shouted. I ran. Slack's tone hardened. "You saw him again last night?" She nodded slowly. I followed him to the church. I know I shouldn't have. Miss Marple's voice softened. Go on. He had the key again. I watched him go inside. Then, she hesitated. Someone else came out of the dark. A woman. Slack straightened. You're sure? Yes. She wore a long grey cloak. She followed him up the tower stairs. I didn't see her face. The girl's voice cracked. I waited. I heard the bell move once. Then I ran home. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. A grey cloak, you say? Lily nodded. The kind the headmistress wears. For Sunday service. Slack muttered. Grace Huxley again. Miss Marple didn't reply. Her gaze moved to the window where rain had begun to fall. Each drop struck the glass like a thought forming. Lily, she said gently, where is the cloak now? I don't know. But this morning Miss Huxley told me not to come near her house. Said she was ill. Slack closed his notebook. We'll check it. He and Miss Marple left the school, boots crunching on wet gravel. The headmistress's house sat silent across the green, curtains drawn. A single lamp burned inside. Slack found the cloak hanging near the back door, still damp, washed clean. But the faint scent of wax clung to the fabric. He turned to Miss Marple. Her eyes, calm and steady, met his. She's careful, she said softly, too careful. The inspector lifted the cloak by its collar. Drops of water fell onto the floorboards like tears. Miss Marple's voice was low, certain. That cloak, she said, wasn't clean to remove mud. It was to remove guilt. That cloak is found washed, still damp. The locksmith shop sat at the edge of the village square. A narrow place, full of brass, dust, and quiet. Inspector Slack stood at the counter, hat in hand, notebook open. The old locksmith rubbed his fingers clean on a rag. Yes, I remember, the man said. About a week ago. Woman came in, asked for a copy of a church key. Slack's tone sharpened. A church key? The man nodded. Tower key, she said. Long stem, fancy teeth. Miss Marple stood just inside the door, silent, watching. Did she give her name? She asked softly. The locksmith squinted. I wrote it in my book. Mrs. Abel. Slack frowned. Abel Trask's wife. The man chuckled. Couldn't be, sir. She's been dead 10 years, if I recall. Slack flipped open his notebook. You sure about the name? Positive. She said she wanted it ready the next day. Paid in cash. New bills. Miss Marple's eyes wandered over the counter. Dust on every hinge and lock except one. A small key hook, polished clean. She handled it herself, she murmured. The locksmith nodded. Didn't want me touching it. Said it was private. Slack pressed. What did she look like? He thought a moment. Tall. Neat. Spoke proper. Gloves, hat, dark coat. Kept her face half-turned. Miss Marple's voice came soft but sure. Sounded like a widow. He blinked. Aye, that's it. Carried herself like one, too. Slack closed his notebook. We'll need that page from your ledger. The locksmith hesitated. Wish I could help, sir. She tore it out herself after paying. Said it was a church matter. Slack cursed under his breath. Miss Marple gave a small, knowing smile. Whoever copied that key, she said, knew how to vanish without trace. They stepped back into the rain. The village bells struck 4. Each tolled slow, hollow, like a heartbeat in stone. Slack pulled his collar high. Mrs. Abel, he muttered. Why use a dead woman's name? Miss Marple walked beside him, her tone gentle. To sound harmless, to sound pitied, the perfect disguise. They turned down the lane toward the vicarage. The lamps inside burned low. The vicar was at his desk writing, hands trembling just slightly. Slack approached him. We found who made the second key. A woman called herself Mrs. Abel. The vicar's pen froze. Ink bled across the paper. He looked up slowly. I see. Miss Marple moved closer, her gaze steady. You recognize the name, Reverend? He didn't answer. Slack circled behind the desk. A drawer sat slightly open. Papers stacked neatly inside. Something white caught the edge of his eye. He pulled it free, an envelope. Fresh paper. Bold handwriting. Miss Marple read the words aloud, barely a whisper. To the Reverend Paul Linton from Mrs. Abel. Her eyes lifted, calm but cold. Then, she said quietly, the dead do write when someone lends them a hand. The vicar's drawer holds an envelope signed, Mrs. Abel. The pews were lined with shadows. Candles burned low, their light trembling across the stone floor. Everyone had gathered: the vicar, Grace Huxley, Lily, Mr. Doyle, and a few villagers who couldn't stay away. Miss Marple stood near the altar. Her posture was still, but her eyes missed nothing. Inspector Slack stood to her right, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began softly. Her voice carried easily through the nave. "The truth, like this bell tower, cannot hold its silence forever." No one spoke. Only the faint rustle of coats, the shifting of uneasy feet. She looked up toward the tower. "Last night I came here. Someone else was inside. Someone who thought darkness might keep their secrets safe. But secrets," she said, echo like bells. Grace's eyes dropped. Lily bit her lip. The vicar's hands twisted the edge of his sleeve. Miss Marple stepped closer to the group. "Let us start with what we know. A man is dead. Mr. Trask, the verger blackmailer, bully, and keeper of keys. He knew every sin in this parish. He collected them, one coin at a time." Slack nodded slightly, his gaze sweeping the room. "He took from Grace Huxley," Miss Marple continued, "letters written by her late husband. He threatened her peace, her reputation." Grace whispered, "I didn't kill him." Miss Marple inclined her head. "No, but you met him. You argued. You went home. You left the door open for someone else." Grace flinched. The vicar's eyes darted toward her, then away. "And someone else," Miss Marple went on, "used a second key. A copy. Ordered under the name Mrs. Abel." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The vicar's breath caught audibly. Miss Marple turned toward him. "You received a letter from that same name. I believe it lies in your drawer still." Slack stepped forward. "Care to explain, Reverend?" The vicar's lips moved, but no sound came. Finally, he said, "He was ruining us all. Abel Trask knew everything. I meant only to frighten him, to make him stop." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "But you weren't the one who tied the rope." Silence. Then Grace spoke, trembling. "He was cruel, Jane. He made me live in fear for years, but I swear I left him alive." Miss Marple nodded. "I believe you. But you knew who followed you, didn't you?" Grace's breath shook. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I did. I couldn't stop it." The bell above groaned faintly in the wind. Every head turned upward. Miss Marple looked from one face to the next, then to Mr. Doyle, standing in the back, hands in his coat pockets, eyes cold. "You, Mr. Doyle," she said quietly. "You rang that bell." He gave a bitter laugh. "Someone had to end it. He was choking this village." Grace covered her mouth, sobbing. Miss Marple's tone was calm, almost sorrowful. "You followed him into the tower. He mocked you. You fought. And when the rope slipped," Doyle looked down. "I pulled it," he said. "I made sure he couldn't speak again." Gasps broke through the stillness. The vicar crossed himself. Lily turned away, tears running silently. Doyle's voice dropped lower. "But it wasn't her fault. She didn't kill him." Miss Marple met his gaze, her voice quiet and steady. "Then whose fault was it, Mr. Doyle?" He stepped forward slowly, the echo of his boots sharp on the floor. His shadow stretched across the altar, long and dark. "It wasn't her," he said again, louder now. "It was me. It wasn't her. It was me." Mr. Doyle stood in the aisle, head bowed. The church was dim, just enough light to touch his face. Inspector Slack waited near the vestry door, pencil still in hand. Miss Marple stood between them, steady as stone. "Go on, Mr. Doyle," she said quietly. "You've told us it was you. Tell us why." He looked up slowly. "Because Abel wouldn't stop," he said. "Not with the money. Not with the threats." Slack frowned. "What threats?" Doyle's voice roughened. "He knew I'd borrowed from the parish fund. I meant to pay it back every penny, but the drought came. The ravens fell sick, and I couldn't. Miss Marple's tone stayed even. So he found out. Doyle nodded. Last week, he came to my cottage, said he'd tell the vicar. Said I'd lose my job, my name, my home. He swallowed. I begged him. He laughed. Silence filled the church. Outside, wind swept across the graves, making the grass whisper. I followed him to the tower, Doyle said. He had the rope in his hands. Said he'd ring the bell to wake the village to shame me. Said everyone would know what I'd done. Slack stepped closer. And then, Doyle's eyes flickered toward the altar. He struck me. I pushed him back. He stumbled, grabbed the rope to steady himself. But it twisted. It caught around his neck. He fought, but he stopped. His hands trembled. Miss Marple waited, her voice barely above a breath. And then, he didn't make a sound after that, Doyle said. The bell moved once, just once, and then silence. The echo of his words hung in the air, thin and final. Lily sobbed quietly in the back pew. Grace Huxley stared at the floor, pale and still. Slack wrote something, then looked up. You left him hanging? I couldn't touch him, Doyle said. I thought if I did, I'd damn myself twice. I ran. I came home, sat by the fire till morning. Miss Marple's expression softened only slightly. You weren't evil, Mr. Doyle, she said, but you were weak. Weakness can toll as loudly as guilt. He gave a tired nod. He rang his last sermon, he said quietly. His voice broke on the words. The bell took him before I could stop it. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the wind hummed faintly through the tower slats. Slack sighed. So it's done then. A fight, a fall, an accident turned murder. Miss Marple shook her head slowly. Not quite. Doyle's eyes lifted. Her gaze fixed on him again, calm, piercing. There's something else, she said softly. Something you haven't told us. He looked down at his hands. The silence stretched. Then at last he spoke. There's one more truth, Miss Marple. His voice dropped to a whisper. I wasn't alone. But there's one more truth, Miss Marple. I wasn't alone. The morning after Doyle's confession, rain swept over Elmridge on Hollow. The streets gleamed. The air smelled of ash and wet stone. Miss Marple sat in the vicar's study, her shawl folded neatly around her shoulders. The door creaked open. Lily stepped inside, eyes red, hands twisting her handkerchief. She looked smaller than ever, fragile, yet burdened. Inspector Slack stood by the window, saying nothing. Miss Marple gestured to the chair. Sit, my dear. Lily obeyed, voice trembling. Is Mr. Doyle in prison now? Slack answered quietly. For now. She nodded, as if expecting that. But her next words broke the silence. He wasn't alone that night. Miss Marple's gaze didn't move. Her tone stayed calm. No, she said softly. He wasn't. Lily's lip trembled. Tears gathered again. I helped him, she whispered. Slack straightened. You? She nodded quickly, words tumbling out in a rush. I saw everything. I followed Mr. Trask, too. I wanted to make sure he didn't hurt anyone else. Her breath hitched. When he fell, Mr. Doyle panicked. He thought he'd killed him on purpose. I told him to go. I said I'd make it look like an accident. The words hung heavy. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. You tied the rope again? Lily covered her face. I only meant to help. I didn't know what else to do. Slack exhaled slowly, scratching at his notebook. You cleaned the floor, took the candle, washed the cloak. Lily nodded, shaking. I thought if anyone found out, the school would close. I'd lose my job. Miss Huxley would lose hers. Everyone would blame me. Miss Marple's expression softened. Fear she'd seen it before. So many times. The kind that twists good hearts into liars. My dear, she said gently, you did wrong, but you did it for the wrong reasons we all understand, fear and love. Lily sobbed quietly. I didn't mean to hide the truth. I know, Miss Marple said. Truth often waits until it's ready to be heard. Slack shut his notebook. So what now? Miss Marple rose from her chair. She looked out toward the rain-soaked churchyard. Now, she said softly, we let the law and conscience finish what the night began. Grace Huxley appeared in the doorway, pale but calm. She's just a child, Inspector, she said. She was trying to protect someone. Miss Marple turned to her. Weren't we all? Grace lowered her eyes. No one spoke for a long moment, only the sound of rain against the glass. Finally, Miss Marple reached for Lily's trembling hands. Her voice was quiet, almost kind. Truth delayed, she said, is not truth denied. The girl broke down completely then, not with guilt, but with release. All the fear poured out, leaving only silence. Doyle was taken that afternoon, escorted through the Tudorsedin churchyard. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He only paused once, looking up at the tower as though waiting for it to toll again. The villagers watched from their windows. The rain softened to mist. The world began to move again. Miss Marple stayed in the church long after everyone had gone. The floor was clean now. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and wet stone. She stood beneath the tower, gazing up. The rope hung still, frayed at the end. She touched it once, lightly, like greeting an old friend. Peace comes late, she murmured, but it comes. She turned to leave, her footsteps soft against the stone. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale, almost forgiving. Then, from above, it happened. The bell moved. Just once. Slow, heavy, unmistakable. The sound rolled through the empty church, deep and sorrowful. Miss Marple stopped, eyes lifting. No wind, no hand on the rope. Only that one. Final toll. And then silence. Evening settled over Street Merrymead. Miss Marple poured her tea, the cup steaming gently beside the window. Outside, the wind carried a single, distant toll, soft, fading, final. Lady Bantry knitted in her chair. Hastings scribbled notes by the fire. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Evil hides in small silences, she said, voice low. But truth, it always rings. The fire crackled. The bell was still. And somewhere, in another quiet parish, another secret waits.